Welcome to the Minnehaha County Historical Society's History Talk. My name is Ron Sabe, President of the Historical Society, and tonight's presentation is the Spanish Flu of 1919, presented by Jim Carlson. Tonight's sponsor is FYI, a media production company specializing in history and legacy preservation. I want to thank you for viewing tonight, and I want to thank you, all of you that have been viewing in the past. Our viewership has been very well maintained during this past couple of months. With YouTube Live, we are reaching over 300 people during the month. With our presentations, we are averaging between 80 and 90 people or viewers that check into our program. I'd like to invite you to be a member if you're not a member. If you like our history talks, I encourage you to join our organization. It's $35 a year, or if you're a senior, it's $30 a year. Your membership entitles you to our newsletter. Our newsletter will provide you some historical facts about Minnehaha County, as well as keep you informed as to what's coming up. So if you are interested in our organization, contact us. You can contact us at info@minnehahahistory.org, or you can call 951-9200. You can check us out on Facebook. Go to facebook.com, Minnehaha County Historical Society, or go to our website, minnehahahistory.org. I want to remind our members that our dues are due for 2021. If you haven't paid your dues, I encourage you to do so. Our budget, operating budget, is based on the dues from our membership for the year, and we are well into 2021. I would like to bring you up to date as to the Tuthill House. Some of you are aware that there was a plan to demolish the Tuthill House. They are having a meeting on February the 24th, and that is at 6 p.m. at Prairie Green Golf Course. So I encourage you, if you want to find out some information about their plans for the house, to attend the meeting. They are about halfway on their fundraising, and so if you are inclined to donate some money to this project, I encourage you to contact the Sioux Falls Area Community Foundation. That's where they have a fund set up for the Tuthill House. If you want to contact them by website, they are available at sfacf.org/Tuthill. I want to bring to your attention a couple of programs coming up in the springtime. We're really looking forward to this spring. The State Theater in March, it's the State Theater and Nightlife History presented by Stephen Kasulos. In April, it's the 100th anniversary of Women's Rights to Vote, presented by Karen Schreier. And the one in May is something that's been put off from last year because of COVID, and that is the tour of the State Theater. I'm really looking forward to this, and I'm sure a lot of other people are also looking forward to this. Now, this tour includes going down into the basement, which is the dressing rooms, and you can go up to the 4th floor to explore that. And I did not know there was a 4th floor available. Tonight's presentation is the Spanish Flu of 1919. Our presenter is Jim Carlson. Jim Carlson is a lifelong member of the Historical Society and past president. He is currently on the board as a director of the Historical Marker Program. He gave this presentation 2 years ago at the Center of Western Studies. Jim has an interest in history, but his specialty is World War I history, and part of that is the Spanish flu. And it's interesting, here we are a century later dealing with a pandemic. So I present to you tonight the the Spanish Flu of 1919 by Jim Carlson and sponsored by FYI.
Good evening, my name's Rick Lingberg and I'll be tonight's host for this live History Talk presentation. Before we turn the program over to Jim, I'd like to remind you that in the right-hand corner of your screen, you will see a chat box from which you are welcome to type in and interact with each other. And if you have a question for Jim, please type that in and we will entertain those questions as we go along. Now, here's Jim.
Good evening. Glad to be here. Like Ron said, I'm going to talk about the Spanish flu. I'm going to talk about the Doughboys. I'm going to talk about Sioux Falls in the Spanish flu, and a little bit about the Doughboys here and over there. When you look up stories and do research, you're going to find interesting stories. Some are going to be sad and some are going to be funny. And I always like that when I got some with a little humor. The war, everybody says World War I. This was not World War I. This was the war to end all wars because there was no World War II yet. So I might slip and say World War I, but I mean World War. The General John Pershing was the main general there, and he had during the war he had a black division that actually he sent to white officers and then sent them over to work with the French but that's one of the reasons he was his nickname was Blackjack, and also his driver around was a black fella. Kind of interesting, I met this black fellow's grandson at a Center for Western Studies meeting, and we talked about it and found his grandfather in a book that I had. On April 2nd, President Wilson asked Congress to declare war, and on April 6th, the Congress did proclaim the war, and so everything was started. Most of the local soldiers were sent to Camp Dodge in Iowa, Camp Cody in New Mexico, Camp Greene in North Carolina, and then some to Camp Fuston in Kansas to train. And it's as background, it's kind of believed that the flu originated in Camp Funston, and of course it spread wide because of the war. In the USA, when it first started, they call it the gripe. And so why do they call it the Spanish flu? Well, it started going worldwide, but the country of Spain, actually they were neutral in the war. But they had sickness there, and they were ones that weren't afraid to talk about it as much and pronounce more about it than other countries. So it kind of became known as the Spanish flu, and that's the only reason. They just got a name and they stuck with it. Anyway. And also when I talk about the World War, I say that the soldiers they always said, over there. What did it do? 1/3 to 1/5 of the world's population is believed to have been affected by the disease. And it's estimated, which is probably hard to do, anywhere from 20 to 50 million worldwide died. There were 675,000 people in the United States that died of the Spanish flu. And one sad thing is that there were 30,000 soldiers that died of the flu before they even got sent to France. Now, the war started, and was everybody in Sioux Falls, for instance, behind it? I think they were, and this would kind of show it. Got that one, Rick? Right. This is July 26, 1917. This was in the Argus Leader. And it's an ad by the Security Trust and Bank. And I thought, this is really something else. I didn't realize till I found this that everybody backed them like they did. But to the men enlisting in the war, and free of charge, they'll safekeep their securities, collection and disbursements of income, paying insurance premiums, investing surplus funds, holding title to real estate, keeping accounts, and acting as an executor. And they've also arranged with local attorneys to draw up your will and all that. And I thought that was pretty sharp that a bank would do that. Another thing I found that by July of 1917, the county or city really got behind, and they raised $5,000, almost $5,000, to help the local soldiers. $64 of it came from a dance that they had, and there was almost 1,000 people in Sioux Falls that donated. The largest one was Mayor Burnside, $25, and the rest of them were maybe $1, and some were 50 cents, and some were 25 cents. But I thought that was pretty sharp that they did. Of course, 25 cents then probably, maybe $2 or $3 now. Okay. Rick, on the next slide. This is another one that's interesting. He didn't have the Spanish flu, but Herb Dorome, he was a Sioux Falls boy, and they say that he died for Old Glory on November 8th, 1918. And he was actually the 27th Sioux Falls boy to give up his life. But he was killed in action. He had been a graduate of Sioux Falls College, and then he worked for Minnehaha Produce, Northern State Power, and Northwestern Bell. What I really thought was sharp about this, he was an only son, and his father, J.A., wrote this. My son, an only child, has been killed on the battlefields of Europe, given his life for his country and his allies. As an American citizen, I could wish for no nobler a death for him, as well as all of the others who died in the same sacred cause. It must be said that they have not died in vain. Next one is Otto. Otto Poley died in March at Camp Cody. Remember I said some of them went to Camp Cody, which is down in New Mexico. After he died and they brought his body back, they had one of the most impressive funerals in Sioux Falls. At that time, there were 2,500 to 3,000 estimated citizens gathered at the Coliseum to pay respects at the 3 p.m. Sunday afternoon service. Everybody got involved. The Elks were in charge of some of the exercises. There was a Reverend W.E. Roberts led a prayer. Spanish-American War veterans were there. The Oddfellows did a salute and a reveille at the gravesite. And at Mount Pleasant. Otto was the son of Mrs. Anna Poley, and she was a widow of Herman. They lived at 1336 East 6th Street. Also, now next to his brother Will. Will Poley died in France, November 9th, 1918, and he did have pneumonia. When I say pneumonia, then we say Spanish flu. They might have called it pneumonia, but in my mind, it was Spanish flu that caused the pneumonia, the flu that led to that. Will was a brother of Otto, and they had burial rites in the American sector in La Roche, France. Before the war, he was employed by Claire McNeil Garage in the Milwaukee Road. And when he died, the Red Cross sent his mother Anna a letter and said, just before he died, the nurse wrote this, the Red Cross nurse, just before he died, he begged me to write to you and not forget. Tell her I have been sick for a long time, but picking up. The nurse said he didn't seem to know that he was leaving us. The body was actually returned in November 1920 for services here. Then we go to Sailor James Sweeney. He died December 21st. He was the son of John Sweeney, who lived at 230.5 North Main in Sioux Falls. And he did pass away at the Naval Training Center in San Francisco. After he died, a telegram was sent to the family about his death, but it got lost when it got to Sioux Falls. So the family didn't receive it. And out there at the Navy base, if they don't hear from the family within 6 days, what do we do with the body? They bury him there. So that turned out to be a problem. And then they finally did get the information to the family, and it was so they let's see, where am I? Anyway, so they did get to the family, and then the body was returned. Oh, I'm sorry, I went to the wrong one. Am I back on John Sweeney? Yeah. I slipped there. Okay, I got that one. Right. Okay, then we go to Armstrong's. George Armstrong, Lieutenant George Armstrong, he died in France of pneumonia. And he wrote back home that he'd been in the hospital since November 29th of 1918, but he said, "I didn't want to write and I didn't want to worry you." His mother was Mary Armstrong, and she was a widow, lived at 909 South Springs. And she had been waiting for a word, but he said, "Don't worry about me." In his letter, he said, I'm going to go dancing tonight. And George had done real well. He was commended for his work with the U.S. Balloon Corps. His brother, Lieutenant Victor Armstrong, was an MD in the U.S. Navy, and as a brother of George, he was he got the flu and was in the Naval Hospital in London for about 6 to 8 weeks. He writes home, and he said, "I've lost 30 pounds, and I had hard spell of sickness." I don't know what that really means, but a hard spell of sickness. And interesting, Victor, on April 17th, April of 1917, he had just married to a Lucille, and they had a son born in May 27th, 1918. But both George and Victor, they survived the pandemic and the flu. Now they get back, and there's also another brother. His name was Charles. He was not in the service, but he developed, he was 32 years old. He developed pneumonia from the Spanish flu, as well as his wife and his children. They're all stricken with the influenza. Charles died on January 5th, 1919, at their home at 909 South Spring. Charles was president of Armstrong Page Auto Company, so he was an auto dealer, very well respected in the community. And it was said that a special nurse gave the family the best care, except for Charles, whose condition rapidly grew worse. Another brother, doing a little research, was not in the war, is Dr. Frederick Armstrong. He was a dentist. And I start looking a little further. My mother was a dental assistant for Dr. Armstrong before her marriage. And he was my childhood dentist. But in June 1919, Dr. Armstrong was in the McKinnon Hospital with the Spanish flu, but he did survive. Next one would be Edward Holstetter. And they received word that from his parents of his death at Camp Sherman in Ohio, and he was 27 years old. Friends had received a letter prior to his death saying that he was in best of health. So the death was really a shock to them and the family. His father was Joe Hossetter, and he was a superintendent of the county farm. just outside Sioux Falls, and Joe and Emma, but they did live at 231 North Spring, Sioux Falls. Edwin's brother Guy Hostetter was 25, and he came home from the funeral by Rock Island. He was at the Camp Johnson, Jacksonville, Florida, waiting to go over the war, but then after the war, so he didn't go, and after the war he lived at the Blackstone Apartments down in Sioux Falls on Phillips Avenue. Then we got Henry Clausen. Henry, another sad story. Henry took his own life. He had developed the flu, and he was despondent over his illness. So he took his own life on January 8th, 1919. He was in Camp Shelby, Mississippi, and they called him a splendid young man of 22, and he had attended Sioux Falls Business College, after which he worked for Brown and Sanger. After that, he was a bookkeeper at the Interstate Fruit Company. The Clausen family was from Howard, South Dakota, and when he came here, he lived with the J.H. Tiflin family at 803 South Phillips. Next, we got James Jordan. He was 29. He died of the Spanish flu at Camp Dix in New Jersey. And it said that, and that was in October 1918, and it said that hundreds filled the Sioux Falls Coliseum for the Sunday afternoon service. There was a band composed of the Musicians Union, and they led the way in a parade to Woodlawn Cemetery. And his mother, Jada Bell Jordan, brought James's 7-year-old daughter, Eloise, to the service. Prior to the service, he was a long-time Olympia theater manager, and he had lost his first wife to death. So he was a single parent for Eloise, 7-year-old Eloise. But then he married Miss Mary Adams, and it was at Camp Cody, July 3rd, and but they had to keep it a secret, so nobody really knew that he had remarried. Sergeant Overman had wrote back to the family, to Mrs. Jordan, and she wrote that, true, he saw no action, but he was willing to and ready to go. In the eyes of God and his fellow soldiers, he died doing his duty. It's said that at camp he was marching in a rainstorm, and he caught the flu and got sick because of that rainstorm. We've got John Bliss. John Bliss died September 19th, 1918 of pneumonia in French camp. And he's buried in a cemetery in France, an American cemetery. Cemetery plot D, row 27, GR9 in Thicant, France, if you're going over there to find him. But Mr. and Mrs. John Bliss, they had 7 sons in the service, and you'll be seeing that picture next. They lived at 1115 North Phillips Avenue. They had 13 children, 11 boys, 2 girls, and Mary Louise was John Martin Bliss's twin sister. But his mother has said that after 7 of the boys signed up, she said, "That's all that I can spare." The Sioux Falls VFW post is named after John Martin Bliss. And we got Henry Larson. He was 31, and he died of pneumonia at Camp Cody, New Mexico, April 26, 1918. His parents, Mr. and Mrs. John Larson, they lived at 1407 East 8th. And he died on the first anniversary of his marriage to Eleanor Waring, who had married when he was home on a 10-day furlough. They had a prayer service was held at his parents' home on East 8th at 2 p.m., following which the body was escorted by the Home Guards to the principal services at the Coliseum. I've noticed they had a lot of services for soldiers at the Coliseum. At 2:30, the building was packed with a crowd estimated at 4,500 to 5,000 people, and many were forced to stand in the foyer. Reverend Roberts of the First Presbyterian Church made a stirring patriotic address, they said, followed by Reverend Eberhard, pastor of the East Side Methodist Church, who gave his talk. Henry was actually the second Sioux Falls soldier to die at Camp Cody after Otto Poley that we talked about earlier. And prior to the war, he was a traveling salesman. On the parade to Mount Pleasant, after the funeral was over, Lieutenant Art Mucko on a white horse led the parade to Mount Pleasant, followed by a platoon of police, flag bearers, musician union band, a firing squad, chaplains, a hearse with the body, pallbearers walking on each side, mourners in auto, and discharged soldiers, sailors, home guards, Spanish-American war vets, drum corps, members of GAR, Boy Scouts, school children, and an automobile with friends. So you can see that was quite a day for the town. And it worked out real. Mayor George Burnside had urged the citizens to attend the funeral on April 29th, 1918, and he probably asked some of the businesses to shut down. And we got Oscar Nelson. He was 22 when he died of France. It says pneumonia on October 28, 1918. He's the son of Ed Nelson. They lived at 707 South 3rd. Oscar's mother had died when he was young. Prior to the war, he was an operator at the Colonial Theater, where his sister Tessie was the organist. And he was actually the first Mason to die in the war in France from the area. Next, Floyd, and I don't know how to pronounce this right, Felix, I think. He was 23. He was son of Erhard Felix, and they lived at 912 North Spring. He died of pneumonia in France in October 24th. Floyd was experienced when trouble with Mexico occurred. He enlisted and went on the campaign in the Mexican border. So when U.S. declared war on Germany, he was ready to go. He went through many grueling battles in France, and he escaped injury, only to die of the sickness. But the family was one of the oldest families in Sioux Falls. Next we got Harold Hinton. He was 24. He died at Fort Bayard, New Mexico. He was the son of Mr. and Mrs. Effie Hinton, and they lived at 809 South Duluth in Sioux Falls. He was taken ill with pneumonia, which developed into tuberculosis, which causing death. He had been born on November 16, 1894. He had 4 brothers and 3 sisters. And we kind of go to the Red Cross nurse, because the nurses and women were involved. One Red Cross nurse was Helen Grant. Her parents were John and Etta Grant, and they lived at 111 South Euclid in Sioux Falls. She was in a medical ward in France for patients with pneumonia and Spanish flu. And she writes back to the family, the Red Cross workers are doing all they can for the boys. They have Red Cross huts where they can read, play cards, write, and they also have a piano and a Victrola, and in the evening they can play and sing. And she says they need all that done for them, for there are a great many temptations over here. Unless they have amusements, they might go astray, she writes. Another nurse was Red Cross nurse Amy Lamont, and she was recorded as the first Sioux Falls Red Cross nurse to reach France. And she said, we girls are under pretty strict rules here as far as associating with enlisted men. Although we are not allowed to go out with any of them or visit socially, we certainly do all we can for them when brought in as patients. And she states that I'm glad to hear that the Sioux Falls doctors are getting into the big fray. And she says, I hope when they come to the hospital evacuation number 1, where I'm at. Meanwhile, back in Minnehaha County, they had a Red Cross Day at the Wall Lake. And they brought in $1,000 for war efforts, and that was from a 5 o'clock chicken pie supper. I wonder how that went across. But anyway, they had refreshments and amusements were furnished, and there was a crowd estimated at 3,500. Lennox band played. A Wall Lake baseball team played the Montrose team, and they said it was a real thriller. Wall Lake won 7-5 at the end of the 9th inning, and it had been tied 5-5 at one time. And then the Hartford Home Guard, they gave a drill, and they were actually in charge of the grounds, and it says not one accident happened. Oh, then we go to the Savages, and just a little bit back in Sioux Falls, you know, the Spanish flu was here, and pneumonia claimed the life of a husband and wife, Ralph and Mr. and Mrs. Ralph Savage. And they died within 2 hours of each other, from one at 4 p.m. and one at 6 p.m. after being sick for about a week. The couple was 27 years old and 33. They were born and raised in Sioux Falls, and a double funeral was held. Reverend Roberts, who had married them, preached an eloquent funeral, it said, and it was one of the largest tributes to local citizens accompanying the bodies to the grave. Then we have Alex. And Alex was out of the hospital. He was the son of Mary Budette, lived at 1104 East 3rd, and actually he was reported missing in action, and of course the family didn't know. But he writes a letter back and said, I am kicking around after they found me in the hospital. And he says, I'm anxious to get back to the USA, and I suppose that the Spanish flu has struck Sioux Falls pretty hard, didn't it? And then we go to Clarence Nielsen. He died at Camp Dix, New Jersey, and the base hospital of the Spanish flu. And this picture, here's a picture of him in the county book of Minnehaha County Veterans. And then the next one, the picture is of him. There he is. Next one is him, and actually this picture was taken just a few days before he died, and he was in his overseas uniform, so that we know he was getting ready to go. And it's amazing that sometimes some of these I read that they died very quickly from the Spanish flu. And it was said that his brother Walter will accompany his body home. You got some other nurses, and these are just some that are in the book of the veterans from Minnehaha County. Going from the top left, Clara May Hauglin, Beatrice Brediger, Laura M. Smith, Anna Mulseed, Helen Grant, and Leona Mulseed. And then Florence Paulson and Marta Smith. In the next one, Ethel Harvey, Grace Pulley, Valadine Grinberg, Belle Rhymes, and Hannah Verlong. Then we had some local doctors that went over, and some of them were R. Regan, George Stevens, R.G. Stevens, T.G. Thompson, Goldie Zimmerman, A.F. Grove, T.E. Jones, W.F. Keller, N.J. Nessa, E.L. Perkins, Frank Putnam, C.A. Butler, D.W. Craig, C.L. Culver, W.E. and S.A. Donahue, and G.G. Cotton. The Donahue and Cotton are the ones that started Donahue Clinic that later became Central Plains Clinic. And they were the first, when the new bank at 9th and building was built at 9th and Phillips, they moved their office there, and they were one of the first ones in the office. As well as my dentist, Dr. Armstrong, that was his office. So I remember going to that building to see the doctor, dentist. Now we should be on Ann Haugan Berdahl. A very well-known person around Sioux Falls. They've got Berdahl Hall over at Sanford Hospital dedicated to her. I got a few information out of a book that the Sioux Valley School of Nursing put together. It was published by the Alumni Association. And it's interesting, Ann Haugan Berdahl, she was born May 5th, 1887. She died in 1991, and she was 104 years old. So she was a World War I Army nurse, and then she was with the Red Cross, and in 1959 she was honored as Nurse of the Nation. When the April headline screamed, "America enters the World War," Ann wrote her brothers and said, "Please postpone enlisting right now." But she soon learned that they'd already signed up. From then on, her aim was to be military service. So on November 17th, 1917, she enrolled, and her name would go into the Army Nurse Corps. And she said, "I want to go anywhere, I want to go to France or anywhere but Jefferson Barracks," which was in the fort in LeMay, Missouri. Well, she ended up in Jefferson Barracks, and the Spanish flu struck so bad. She had, the hospital there had, it was a 500-bed hospital. And then they heard reports from other camps that they were getting stuck with the Spanish flu. And so all of a sudden a troop of recruits that were seriously ill showed up at the hospital in Jefferson Barracks, and soon a hospital with 500 beds that had 1,500 flu patients were admitted. All this is going on, and people start getting worried. The civilian employees, they didn't want to get sick, so they went home and left. The poor nurses that were working, they got sick. And so poor Ann Berdahl, she ended up working 18 hours a day. And all the time, her in the back of her mind, how are my brothers doing? Are they sick or aren't they? And they weren't. But she was always wondering. And then later they did change it so she couldn't work more than 12 hours. But how they accomplished that, I'm not sure. With that many patients there. We talk about the disease and the Spanish flu and pneumonia. And actually, when you have a war, the real enemy is almost not the gun, it's the disease, which has mowed down many troops impartially. In early wars, I thought this was interesting, sick soldiers, they received little attention. Like Napoleon's Peninsular Campaign, 400,000 died of disease. In the Russian campaign of 1812, 4,800 perished of the disease. In the Crimean War of 230 of 1,000 British soldiers died of disease. The Franco-Prussian War of 1870-71, French deaths were 140 per 1,000. In the Boer War, British soldiers, double numbered, were killed by disease other than bullets. Russian-Japanese War disease claimed 27,142 soldiers. American Civil War, the Union had 45,000 deaths from dysentery, 20,000 from pneumonia. Confederate Army had 50,000 from dysentery, 17,000 from pneumonia. And you can see that, of course, these diseases spread because of the lack of sanitation, and they really didn't understand it. Next, you're going to say, okay, you talked about the First World War. How did you get started, you asked me? Well, my dad had an uncle, Olaf Thorson, and he was in the war. He got, my dad told me stories about him later. He was with the ambulance division and transportation, and they were to pick up patients and ones that had got harmed. And him and another guy were out there by where was an unexploded bomb, and they were not supposed to touch it. And the other guy picked it up. It exploded. He was killed, and my great uncle Olaf lost an arm and had part of his skull shot off. And that kind of got me going. So I came. I see those pictures again, starting again, Rick. Yeah, okay, there's a tombstone, and a neat story about Olaf. He married Maud Mitchell out of Madison, and the preacher that married him was Guy Squire. He lived from 1875 to 1935. So Guy Squire married him. When Olaf was over in French, Guy Squire was the chaplain for his unit. So he was there when Olaf got hurt. They both came back to Sioux Falls, and Olaf, he died in 1927 from injuries that he'd received, mainly from the brain injury. And Guy Squires was the pastor at his funeral. So that's kind of really following you through your life. Okay, now there's the tombstone, and we go. And oh, another thing, Squires. I went out and I took a picture of Olaf Thorson's tombstone, and right behind him is a tombstone for Guy Squires and his family. The next one, that just shows that was his obituary and a little bit about it. And the next one, Rick, would be just in the paper telling about him with this sharp-nosed. And then the next one, just some pictures of Olaf. He was a smiley guy. The next one, that's him on the top right. Next to him is his parents, Christian and Martha, and they would be my great-grandparents. The bottom picture is Olaf's not there because he had died. But that's all his brothers and sisters. He was the only one that was in the war, and my grandma's the one on the right. Then we go to some advertising. Oh, whoops, I forgot. One more on the, this is a doughboy, and I got enthused on World War I, listening to my dad talk about his uncle Olaf. I went to an auction like 25, 30 years ago, and there was a doughboy doll, and I looked at it, and one arm was gone, and part of the head was cracked off. This must be an omen. I need to be collecting World War I stuff. And that doll, I did have it repaired. Maybe shouldn't have, but I did. Okay, our next one, are we back on the advertising now? Yeah, okay, these are ads from the Sioux Falls Press. Argus Leader wasn't around, but the Sioux Falls Press lasted for some time. And this one, November 1919, it just says tablet form, and it said safe, there's no opiates, and it breaks up a cold in 24 hours. Well, is the cold the same as Spanish influenza? I don't know, but they're selling a product. The next one is how to avoid influenza, and it's a 25-cent box of Nature's Remedy. Nothing you can do will so effectively keep your organs clean. And they say doctors warn of the danger of constipation and advising and urging you to see that the bowels and other organs act freely. They say ordinary laxatives are good, but they do not strengthen the weakened organs. They do not build up vitality. Then we have some society news. I just thought this was interesting. Just the Red Cross, they need to work for all, and then they said despite the celebration that will attend the end of the war, the Red Cross still works to remain, or work remains for women of the country. And they had to get together. The purpose was to make pneumonia jackets and contagious war masks to wear to care for the local demand in the Sioux Falls vicinity. My question, what's a contagious war mask? It sounds like it's what you wouldn't want to wear. And then pneumonia jacket, what's that? Is that something to put on? So pneumonia goes away, okay. Well, the next one. And of course, this is for children's colds. And it's Foley's honey and tar. And it says it tastes good, contains no morphine, no chlorophene form or other drugs that you wouldn't give to young children. And in the small print it says, Mrs. B.H. Garrett said, gave it to my month-old baby with a severe cold, has not been sick since. A month-old, okay. Next one on, ad's a little torn up, but it kind of tells us. Oops. Well, how to use Vicks Vapor Rub in treating, I think we all know what Vicks Vapor Rub is, but it was back there in the 1917. In treating the Spanish influenza, it attacks the linings of the air passages and stimulates mucous membranes to off the germs. Evidence proves that this is a germ disease spread principally by human contact, chiefly through a cough, squeeze, or spitting. And I like this. Every century has its attacks. Avoid crowds, common drinking cups, and towels, and so forth. And is our current epidemic kind of like 103-4 years ago? I think it kind of, if you look at it, we have a lot of similarities. The next one's a poster that the South Dakota State Health Department put out in 1919, and the copy of this was received from the South Dakota State Historical Society. And I think that you'll see the hints are kind of familiar with now about coughing and sneezing and wearing a mask. And I didn't realize that they maybe wore a lot of masks back then, but I've seen a lot of pictures where they did wear masks. Some of them did. The next one, we're talking about a Beersford teacher. I thought this was interesting. She's covering her beat. Her and other teachers are doing their police duty to aid authorities by calling on homes on their beat to see that children stay in their own yards. Good luck keeping a child in their own yard. And she says it's a hardship, but it's necessary. And then along with that, there was another one, just a Lake Preston boy that died. And his parents received notice of his death a few days before his safe arrival overseas card showed up. It's unknown if he was sick before he left the USA or at the hospital. When they got to France, they always sent a card back home that I had a safe arrival. So apparently he dropped his in the mail, and he must have got sick and died fairly fast. As you do research, you kind of come across more stories, and I came across another one about Albert Wall, and actually he's got a relative that's one of our historical members. Albert Wall died in France of pneumonia on October 12, 1918. And before the draft, he worked 10 years at the Beehive in the grocery department. And a lot of people might remember the Beehive. It was kind of the thing back then. I believe that later on, I think Fannel's bought him out or something. He was 29 years old, and his mother had died, so Wall's father, brother, sister, they moved to Sioux Falls, lived with the La Follette family in West Sioux. 2 months before Albert died, his dad, A.C. Wall, was walking on the street, on the sidewalk, and he got knocked over by a bicycle rider and was killed. Brother Albert Wall's brother Harvey Wall, he was recently married at that time, and he came to Sioux Falls for a short visit with his bride before he went to Camp Fuston, and I'm not sure what happened to him. The next one, and we're in McCook County, and I thought this was interesting. J.C. Breeding was the McCook County Sheriff. He died on Monday, November 7th, 1918, a victim of the Spanish flu. But on Tuesday the 8th, the next day, he was re-elected sheriff. And so the commission had to appoint someone to fill his vacancy. I thought that was kind of funny. Another one, the Spencer newspaper, more deaths in their words were more deaths in the city and county. S.M. Solomon died Sunday morning, as did Mrs. Ed Muters of pneumonia, following attack of the Spanish flu. So that's what I say. They got the Spanish flu and they got pneumonia. And Mrs. Ed Art Rockefeller died on Tuesday, and also her 6-year-old daughter. I didn't catch how many, but it said the other 6 children are in precarious condition and not expected to live. Quite a newspaper article there. Going on to shell shock. I just kind of chuckled at this several times. Shell shock veteran shoots self, and it says will die. Well, did he die or what? Will die. This is in the Argus on January 11th, 1921. His name was Thomas Veach, and he was of Gregory, South Dakota. He was 23 years old. And here it says he fatally wounded himself with a shotgun. But previous to that, his mother had taken him to the insanity board in the county, as he had been acting, as he said, queerly. And the board said, he's sane, and they sent him home. Then the article says he attempted suicide at his parents' home. Well, did he commit suicide or not? I don't know. Anyway, they say the reasons for the loss of his mind were shell shock and poison gas. Then we have Lieutenant C.D. Johnson. I thought this was interesting. He sent a letter to his parents October 6, 1918. And he said that peace will come soon, which it was in a few days. The armistice was signed. But he says we need to properly break the German spirit. Breaking their spirit completely will not be an ideal solution. In my opinion, they should have listened to him, because some of the causes of the main cause, I think, was the World War II was the German people were so down and completely down that they were willing to listen to a dictator. Number 14, I like this one, although it was almost before the war was over. This was an ad in the Sioux Falls Press, and it said, keep him smiling, send him a gift of the home daily newspaper so he can keep track of what's going on. The daily paper was $4 a year. What's the Argus now? $4 a day? No. Anyway, it says, if he returns, your money will be refunded. And I thought that was kind of sharp. Then we got a picture of the Sioux Falls Press, November 11th, 1918. And it says the armistice was signed. I get a kick out of this one. That's the 3rd edition. So they certainly were able to get things out fast, even back in those days, without computers and all that. Then, what were they listening to around those? The music. Some of the songs of the time. How are you going to keep them down on the farm after they've seen Paris? It's a long way to Tipperary. And Hail, Hail, the gang's all here. I thought those were, I kind of remember all those songs. You've probably all heard of the poem Flanders Field, and a Canadian Lieutenant Colonel John McCrae wrote that when he was over in Flanders Field in France. And he actually died a few months later in action. In Flanders Field, the poppies grow between the crosses, row on row. That marks our place, and in the sky, the lark still bravely singing fly. Scarce heard amid the guns below, we are the dead short days ago. We lived, felt dawn, saw sunset low, loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders Field. Take up our quarrel with the foe, to you from falling hands we throw. The torch be yours to lift it high, if you break faith with us who die. We shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders Field. I thought that was a pretty sharp poem to fit the time. And there's other things that kind of happened. Going back then, I thought this was interesting. Governor of South Dakota was Peter Norbeck, and in November 1918 he was diagnosed with the Spanish flu. He had a fever of 103, and they considered him very, very critical, but after a few days in the hospital he did recover. Another thing I saw that happened, the University of South Dakota Vermilion, they closed their doors because of the flu. Then the Red Cross was employed to perform duties as the health department called for, and the Rapid City mayor decreed that all funerals to be open air. Does that sound familiar now? Some cities required a doctor's note, haven't seen that, a doctor's note as proof that you recovered from the flu so you could walk in the public. Also in Rapid City, a home guard roaming the streets were enforcing the sanitation laws. And one police officer apparently didn't listen. He was fined $6 for spitting on the sidewalk. Another interesting story, there was an Edna Jefferson from Sioux Falls, and she died in Brooklyn, New York, of pneumonia. And they said she was a charming young woman who received her education at All Saints School. Her husband Harry had entered the service and was stationed in New York, and he becomes ill with the influenza. So they sent for Edna, his wife, and she came out to New York to see him. She got stricken with the flu and died, and Harry recovered. Another sad thing, her mother, Edna's mother, was on the way to her bedside, but failed to reach her in time. I found out that Army doctors in 1918, they conducted some autopsies on some of the servicemen who died of the flu, and preserved specimens in formaldehyde and wax. Well, 79 years later, scientists at the Armed Forces Institute of Pathology made a genetic analysis of the virus and concluded that it was unique but closely related to the swine flu. And they said this shows that this virus came to humans from pigs. You know, the flu, it made its way with deaths, and then we had survivors, and then some people got their immunity. And that's kind of, I heard them say now about herd immunity if we get enough people vaccinated. And as far as the 1918, 1919 Spanish flu, I don't think there's very many people around that have Spanish flu immunity. Anyway, after that, in 1997, Robert Webster, he's a virologist at St. Jude's Hospital in Memphis, Research Hospital, looked at all this study that the Army doctors had done in 1918 and then 79 years later. And he said this study was very important because, this is 1997, very important because eventually we will have another influenza pandemic. And I see he was correct. And that comes to the end of where I'm at. And there's a whole lot more stories out there that you could research and find and talk about. So, glad to be here. And, thanks for watching.
Well, thanks, Jim. That was a great presentation. And it takes a lot of research to get all that done. We appreciate all the work that that you did to put that talk together. I kind of was thinking about the irony of it all. You know, we call it World War I, but they called it the war to end all wars. Well, we know how many wars we've had since then. They probably thought the flu was the flu to end all flus, and we know what's happened then. So it's great for you to give us that perspective on things, and we appreciate it. So thank you very much for that presentation. I just want to remind everybody that just a second here. Okay, there we go. Just want to remind you about next month on May 18th. We're going to have Steve Kasulos. What did I say? March 18th. Excuse me. March 18th is not May 18th. March 18th. I stand corrected. Stephen Kasulos is going to be giving the presentation on the State Theater and Sioux Falls nightlife, 1926 to 1936. He'll kind of focus on the State Theater, but he's going to go down down Phillips Avenue there. There was a lot of things going on in Sioux Falls, and he's going to have some real interesting things to tell us about that time. So again, thanks Jim for your I'll get him off of there. There we go. Thanks, Jim, for your great presentation. Thanks, everybody, for being with us tonight as we continue to live stream these programs. As Ron said earlier, we'll have 2 more live streams, one in March, one in April, and then we're going to have that great tour of the State Theater in May. So thanks again for coming out tonight. We really appreciate it.